Hey y'all, from Spindle Mountain Mercantile. I am Heather. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Project number 1. Well, in proper Heather fashion, I am starting off this video by forgetting to take some pictures. I forgot to take pictures of my jewelry box before I started, so I found one online. It's very similar to the one pictured. It's a different vintage, and it's not as nice. That's why I'm fixing it up. I'll be starting with adding molds to it. I'm using Iron Orchid Designs air dry clay, and I'm using their mold called Trimmings 3. They have a lot of neat molds you can use to do this project. I chose the second one from the bottom. I made 2 full length and 2 kind of between a half and third lengths. I know some of you think that I'm probably like tape measure phobic or something because I don't use a tape measure very often, but let me tell you, with this, you don't want to use a tape measure. You want to make this too long because we're going to miter these edges. That's where when the edges are cut at an angle and meet together instead of being squared up. And for me, I find the easiest way to make mitered edges is to lay them over each other and then cut them together so that when you take off the extra bits, the pieces that you want to fit together fit perfectly. Okay, so watch this next part. All right, so I'm moving that and making it go along the wonky line. Now watch my hand. See my finger go across there? Do you know why I did that? Well, I don't, because I was saying it in my head instead of out loud, and I have absolutely no idea why I did that. But I think it had to do with the reason I put the glue on the jewelry box instead of the back of the molds like I usually do. So hey, if you know what I was thinking, go ahead and tell me. The corners are rounded, so I used my razor blade knife to just go along. It's way long, and I put it down below the wood so that it would just go next to that curve, and that way my mold would have the same curve as the jewelry box. And in the front, I made it go along that wavy edge. I just bent it into shape. And on the back, I did the same thing, and look, I turned it around. I think that's so I could get glue on both sides. I have no idea why I'm doing that, you guys. The back corners were squared, but I still cut them the same way just to make sure they lined up all the way. And then I used my palm to press down on the mold. And I am gluing this, but watch, you'll see on the edges, on the sides, when I put the mold down, I don't press down. I only had enough glue to keep it in place while I'm mitering the edges. I cut directly from the corner where they meet in the middle all the way to the outside corner. And then I take out the little pieces, and the 2 big pieces fit together like it's magic. I did it on all 4 the same exact way, and one of my viewers told me if you put glue between where they meet up in the corner, they won't crack. And oh my goodness, it worked so well. So whoever that viewer was, thank you so much for giving me this awesome tip. I really appreciate that. The next mold I'm using is also from Iron Orchid Designs, and it's called Olive Crest. I'm using the plaque in the center. To ensure the clay releases easily from the mold, I added a little cornstarch and I spread it out with a little fan brush. Now, I'm not saying that Tite Bond Quick and Thick is a magical glue that makes your Iron Orchid Designs molds stick to every surface, but for me so far, it has stuck every mold I've made to every surface I've tried. I put a good little amount on the back of the mold, and then I use a brush to make sure it's spread out all the way to the edges. And I do this while it's still wet, and I attach it to my object while it's still wet. I'm using a wet paintbrush to remove the glue that escaped under the mold, and then I'm using my box knife just to cut off a few pieces of mold that went over the edge when I made the mold. And now for the part I have been warned about. I have been told by more than one person that on my YouTube channel, unless I'm aiming for a certain target like moms with daughters, I should not use pink. Well, I guess I'm a rebel, because here I am, using pink. This is a collaboration called Cottage Colors by Jamie Ray Vintage and Debbie's Design Diary. These are 3-in-1 paints. They have the base, the paint, and the sealer all in one. For the smaller jars, I use this handheld milk frother that's rechargeable, and for the bigger jars and cans, I use a submersible blender. I found both of these on Amazon. I will leave a link in the description for those. If you buy anything by using my links to Amazon, they will give me a small compensation for that, but it won't raise your price at all. I'm using kind of like a chippy brush just to make sure it gets into all the little nooks and crannies, but I later moved over to just a small brush because I thought that worked better. Of course, that's why. I did it because I thought it would be awful. I told you I am a rebel. So I'm giving this one really good coat, and then I'm letting it dry, and I'll give it a second coat. This paint is heavily pigmented, not quite as much as Debbie's Design Diary clay paint, but still it has a very good consistency. If I'm putting a lighter color over something very dark, I have found that I need to come back a third time and just touch in some areas. I'm really sorry about the clickety clackety in the background. That's my dogs getting ready to go outside because it's bedtime and they have quite the schedule they are on, and they always let us know what time it is. They get very excited to go outside and they just clickety clackety all over the place until it happens. Oh my gosh, they are so demanding. I swear, sometimes we go places and people are like, "Oh, your dogs are so cute." And I'm like, "Help me. They're holding me hostage." I mean, it's like I need to be rescued, right? Of course, I'm just kidding, you guys. They're wonderful. Couldn't live without them. They're awesome little doggies, and they think I'm perfect, so I live with the clickety clackety. I'm just using a Brillo pad and a wet cloth to clean up my mess before it dries. Next, I'm adding some stamps to the mold on top. So I went to a Facebook Marketplace pickup. I got some furniture, and the gal says, "Hey, you do crafts?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do." And she said, "You want my leftover crafting stuff that I don't use anymore? I'll give it to you for $10." And since, I'm not stupid, I said yes. So I brought home like 3 garbage bags full of stuff and a couple of those little plastic dressers and a little tabletop thing, a whole couple of boxes. There was so much stuff, you guys. It was awesome. She wanted it gone and I wanted it. So it was a win-win. Anyway, these stamps are really deep. So I'm using my hammer to make them as deep as I can get them in there, almost all the way down to the cabinet lid itself. You can use shallow stamps, and that's totally okay. You just want to make sure you press them enough, and you want to use a contrasting color inside those. So maybe if you're going to wet distress, use a dark color underneath, or what I do makes them dark as well. I'm elongating the N. I used an N and the zero, or I can't remember what this was. It wasn't like the lowercase o. It was just like a circle in the shape portion of my stamp collection. So I wanted it to look little and I wanted the end to be big. So I just used a couple of different tools to elongate it. And then I got out my Debbie's clear wax and I went over the entire cabinet and the drawer, and then I let that dry. Now I sell Debbie's DIY products in my booth in Anderson, South Carolina at Centerville Pickers Market, but I don't do mail order. That's okay though. If you want to buy something from me, you can actually use a link that Debbie gave me, and she'll give me credit for what you purchase, but it won't raise your price. And I will leave that link in the description. And if you guys use that, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And thank you, Debbie, for giving me that link. I'll leave a link for these brushes as well. I found them on Amazon. I use one to apply the wax, and then I use the other one to just kind of wipe it off. And after I was done with this, I let it dry overnight. And when it was really, really dry, I got out the black wax the next day. And I used a small brush to make sure I got it into all those little nooks and crannies. Remember, I was talking about making sure your letters are a contrasting color. I made sure I got that black way down inside there. I got out a soft, clean cloth and just started wiping it down. Now, the darker you want it, the more you want to let it sit. You don't want to let it sit until it dries. So I'm talking about minutes, not hours. I rubbed it off fairly quickly. I wanted it to be really a big contrast in the crevices and the different edges than I wanted it on the actual flat surface. I guess I kind of did the drawer first so I could have a practice piece, and I really liked how it turned out, so I did the same thing on the rest of the jewelry box. When I was all done, I realized I forgot to fill in these holes. It's on a fake drawer, and I think there was probably a handle there before I got the box. So I decided to apply some metal ribbon to it. Some places call this metal lace. You can get it at Dollar Tree, Hobby Lobby. I will leave a link for some from Amazon. I went ahead and spray painted it with black spray paint, and I just glued it on with my glue gun. When I was done with it, I put it on the little staging area where I take all my pictures. And the more I looked at it, the more I just thought, this doesn't really float my boat. So I took the lace off, and of course I took a little bit of paint off with it. So I just repainted that little section, and then I used a transfer from this book called Fairy Tale Florals. The florals in this book are motifs that are often seen in historical textiles and pottery. They were drawn from a historic pottery and china design book. Whenever I finish stuff in the house or fix it in the house and I do it on the counter, I see those eggs and the price of eggs right now, I'm thinking I shouldn't put this on like national forums where people can see we have like $500 worth of eggs on our counter. Okay, so I just wanted to use the little hangy downy parts of this. I didn't want to use the top part. The parts that come down that look like a floral, the triangular parts that I'm cutting out, those are black and white, and the part right above it is more of a navy blue. And I wanted to try to stick with black. To apply this transfer, I simply laid it down on the extra dry paint and I rubbed with my fingernail because I left my transfer stick in the shed. A transfer stick comes in every package of IOD transfers. My fingernail didn't work, so I used the end of some scissors. And I got to the end, and guess what? It wasn't all the way dry right there. Oh, I'm so bummed, but it's okay. I lifted it up and I waited for it to dry, and then I used another piece that I had cut out and added it to that, and it looks fine. If you don't know what's going on there, you can't tell. I cut the other part of the little hingy downy things and I put them in between those. I was a little hesitant to use pink, but only because people told me my views would go down. Well, I want to do what I love. And in the 80s in high school, I loved wearing pink and gray and pink and black. I also really enjoy pink and yellow and pink and orange flowers in a flower garden. I thought the pink would be a good complementary color to that orange yellow color that's on the inside of this cabinet, and I didn't want to remove all of that and replace it. And I have to say, y'all, I was right. This cabinet is darling. Project number 2. In someone's trash on the side of the road, I found this little wicker planter that's lined. I'm going to add some molds to it using Olive Crest by Iron Orchid Designs and Air Dry Clay, also by IOD. In my booth, I sell IOD, but I don't do mail order. If you want to order IOD, you can contact my friend Heather at createyourowncozy.com. Or if you want to shop in person, you can find a stockist near you by going to IOD's website. In the description, I will leave a link for both of those. I'm using cornstarch in my mold and fanning it out in all the little nooks and crannies so that my clay will release easily. I'm putting cornstarch in my mold and brushing it with a little fan brush to make sure it gets in all the little crooks and crannies. To help the clay release easier, I'm adding cornstarch to my mold and using a little fan brush to make sure it gets into all the little crevices. Using one long piece of clay instead of several smaller pieces helps these longer pieces to keep from cracking. Also, you can make all of the molds at one time, or you can do them one at a time, release one and move on to the next one. I'm using everything in this mold except for the plaque, and at the end I wish I would have used the plaque, and I'll tell you why. And after I tell you why, I don't know if you can unsee it. You'll have to let me know. Before I put the molds on the basket, I want to have some tape ready. I like to use wide tape because if you use the thin tape, it will leave lines on your mold. So the wider, the better. It just keeps that mold from sliding down the object. I laid everything out on the counter just to see what position I wanted to place them on the basket. I turned the molds over and added Quick and Thick to the back and then brushed it around so that it would go to all of the edges. When you're applying molds to something round, put something on either side of it on the countertop, and that will keep it from moving. So when I applied these molds, I realized I couldn't just press along the whole mold. I had to do each part individually because the wicker basket goes up and down and up and down. So I just worked my way across the mold. And you use a firm but light pressure at the same time. I don't know how to explain it. You don't want to mess up the integrity of the mold design, but you want to get that glue to stick. So you want to be firm enough to get the glue to go through the wicker on the back. It's okay to lift stuff up and replace it into a different position. You might need to add a little bit more glue, and if there's glue on the surface, just use a wet towel or brush to wipe it off. When I'm working with the flat surface, I paint my clay before it dries, and that keeps it from cracking. But since this was round, I had to tape the clay to get it to stay in place, and I waited overnight for it to dry. Well, that was my mama calling me to remind me I'm playing bridge today with the old people. I'm old too, so I can call them that. But they think I'm a baby because I'm the youngest one there. And if you guys haven't ever played bridge and you like to play card games, you really should go learn how to play bridge. It's going to die if more people don't start playing it, and it's so fun. You know, George Washington used to play something very similar to bridge. It was called whist, and it evolved into bridge. It is such a fun game, and it's a partnership game, so that's kind of cool too. I just love playing with my mama. I'm using that scary pink color, Vintage Pink, Cottage Color by Jamie Ray Vintage and Debbie's Design Diary. And I added one good coat, I let it dry, and I added a second coat. I avoided painting the rim so that it would maintain its natural wood color. I wanted that part to be a little bit brighter though, and I also got a little bit of pink on it. So I'm using up a lot of my old stuff that I got before I started selling Debbie's, and I'm just using a brown that I got at Walmart or someplace, maybe a yard sale even. I added some water to it and just mixed it up with my brush, and I'm going over the entire rim. I tested it on the bottom to make sure it was the right color, and it worked. Whenever you're using watered down paints, make sure you hold your object so that the paint won't drip down on what you've already finished. If you do drip it, just wipe it off before it dries, like really quickly after it drips. I'm going to keep going with the same paint and go over the molds. But before I do, I'm going to just rub the brush on a paper towel each time I dip it in the paint so it won't be drippy. And each time I put it on one of the molds, I wipe that mold off so it won't be super dark. And at this point, I'm thinking I don't want it to be on the wicker part, so it'll be a big contrast. So at this point, I'm done, and it's really pretty, right? Yeah, I thought it was really pretty too, but it just missed the mark. And when I brought it in the house and showed my sweet husband, he thought it needed a little something. And you guys, he is not critical of my stuff. He loves everything I make. But he thought that the molds needed to blend in better with the wicker. And you know what? He was right. So I got out my black wax and I gave it one good coat everywhere, all over the molds, all over the wicker. Well, the pink part. I left the rim the way it was, but everything else got a good coat of black wax. I did not let it dry before I took my clean, fluffy towel and started wiping it down. I didn't go like down into the crevices where the molds meet the wicker. I just kind of wiped it evenly everywhere. And now it's done. Now my husband and I both really like it. So tell me, do you like it before I added the black wax or after? I could see people going both ways. I just think it's lovely though. Project number 3, I found a little frame in my stash and I added molds to it, and I mitered these edges the same way I did in the first project. Unfortunately, I don't have any film of that, but you can just refer back to that jewelry box. I used the same Trimmings 3 mold, except I used the one down at the bottom that's just shorter than the others. It's so fun. It's like it's almost like it's a vine growing on a pole. It's just so pretty. I thought it would be nice on this simple little frame and really liven it up, and it did. I went ahead and sanded the edges because they were super shiny, and then I gave it one really good coat of vintage pink and I let it dry and added a second coat. When the second coat was super dry, I got out my Debbie's clear wax and gave it a real good coat of that. I put it on with one brush and wiped it down with the second brush that was dry. Before the next step, I wanted this frame to be super dry, so I let it sit all night, and then I got out my Debbie's Old and Gray Liquid Patina. This is a gray color, and it's supposed to make things look like an old barn might look after it's been sitting there for 100 years. Remember I told you I loved wearing pink and gray when I was in high school in the 80s? Well, I had to try this with vintage pink, and I was so glad I did. I used a small brush so I could get it into all the little nooks and crannies, and then I used my dry brush to go over it and wipe it down. It still had a little too much on it, so after that I just took a paper towel and went over the top parts, and it turned out really good. A frame this fun and quirky needs a picture equally as fun and quirky, so I went through my stash of transfers and found the perfect things. Now, they didn't have a background picture to put them on, so I got out a piece of cardboard and I cut around the piece of glass that goes in the frame so it was a perfect fit. For the background of the fun and quirky transfers I found, I chose this rose. Now, this rose is very special to me. It's the very last piece of transfer I have left from the first transfer I ever bought. I bought these on Amazon, and I think it was a mistake, but they gave me 75% off. So I went back and bought 3 more. I made some furniture. Well, I decorated some furniture for my aunt, and I made some things that I sold, and this is all that's left of that. So whoever gets this picture from my booth is going to get something that's pretty special to my heart. Applying transfers is super easy. You just take off the backing of your transfer and you lay it down exactly where you want it and give it a little rub with your hand. Then you use the transfer stick. That's a little plastic stick that comes with every IOD transfer book, and you rub the entire surface. Next, you pull back the transfer carrier sheet, that piece of plastic that's on the top, with one hand while you rub at the crease with your other hand and the transfer stick. If any of it doesn't stick, you simply lay it back down and rub it again. When the entire transfer is released from the carrier sheet, take that carrier sheet and rub the top of the transfer with it. It's called burnishing, and that's what makes sure everything is completely adhered. Since the rose didn't cover the entire piece of cardboard, I took those little pieces that I had left over and I just added them around the edge. And now it's time for my little fun piece, y'all. I found this cow in my stash. Isn't she precious? Now, the only problem with this is something I also bought on Amazon before I started really doing this. And it's kind of one of those vinyls. Instead of a regular transfer, that plastic carrier sheet is sticky on the other side. So unfortunately, some of my rose is sticking to it. Now, it's okay. It worked out good. I just kept laying it back down and rubbing it and laying it back down and rubbing it, and it finally came off. It was a sticky situation. Hello. Oh boy. Now, of course, Bessie wasn't enough quirky and funness, so I had to add a crown. The crown was a little bit too big for the space, so I just cut off some of the top of it, and it was the same kind of vinyl, so it was another sticky situation. When I was done with it, I just took like a Sharpie. It wasn't a Sharpie, but it was a permanent marker with a fine tip, and I just drew on it where the black should have gone had I not had to cut off the top part. In the process of all of this, I got some paint on the glass, and remember, this paint has sealer in it, so I mean, it was adhered really good. I got out my Sprayway glass cleaner and just gave it one good spray, not even that much. I used a Brillo pad and that paint came right off. I then used paper towels to dry it, and I didn't use any more of the stuff, so it doesn't take much to get that glass super clean. I'll leave a link for it in my description. I needed to add a little bit more, so I got out my black velvet ribbon and I made a cheater bow. That's when you take, well, it's when I take, I don't know what other people call it, but I call it a cheater bow. So how I do that is I put a little dot of glue down and I press the center of the velvet down. Now I leave the velvet part up. Then I loop one side around and I twist it one time so that on the next piece of glue that's in the middle, I put the back side of the ribbon down, and again the velvet is up, and then I just do the other side the same way. Now the middle is kind of messy because there's, glue's popping out and it just doesn't look like a finished bow. So we have to put something there to finish it. And I had a little flower I found. I thought I was done with these, but I found 4 more. I love these little paper flowers. I finished it off by adding some little pink dot type flowers I cut off of another stem. And now Queen Bessie's frame is complete. I am so glad you guys joined me today to see what you can do with pink and not be afraid of it. Did you have a favorite? I Well, you guys, again, I loved them all. That jewelry box is pretty awesome, and I love having fun planters. But that rose really holds a place in my heart, and I envision that picture being on maybe a little girl's dresser, and she's dreaming of one day owning a farm, and that kind of brings me joy. So maybe it's my favorite. If you guys liked this video, I sure would appreciate if you give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything else that maybe you're afraid of trying. I really want you guys to try to make stuff. That brings my heart a lot of joy as well. Until you see me the next time, I hope you have a wonderful week. And as always, I hope you are blessed. Bye.